What if the quietest student in your class was carrying a secret so heavy, it was literally breaking him? What if his silence wasn't disinterest, but a shield? And what if, every single night, while the world slept, he was fighting a battle no teenager should ever have to face? This is the story of Ethan, a young man whose sacrifice went unnoticed, until one observant teacher started to see beyond the tired eyes. This is a story of silent struggles, incredible resilience, and a moment of truth that would bring a teacher to tears. You're about to witness the first chapter of a journey that will challenge everything you think you know about what some students endure. Meet Ethan Miller. At 17, Ethan was, by all accounts, invisible. Not intentionally, not out of malice, but simply, unnoticed. In the vibrant, often chaotic ecosystem of Northwood High, where cliques flourished and drama unfolded daily, Ethan was a ghost. He sat in the back of classrooms, spoke only when directly addressed, and his answers, though usually correct, were delivered with a quiet brevity that discouraged further conversation. He didn't play sports. He wasn't in the drama club. His name never appeared on honor roll announcements, nor did it appear on detention lists. He was simply there. A fixed point in a constantly shifting social landscape. His teachers saw him as a satisfactory, if uninspired, student. His grades were a mix of B's and C's, just good enough to avoid concern, just low enough to avoid praise. They noted his quietness on report cards with phrases like, could participate more, or, a very reserved student. To his peers, he was the guy you might recognize from your English class but whose name you couldn't quite recall. He ate lunch alone, not in a way that screamed for pity, but with a self-contained stillness, as if he were conserving every ounce of his energy. And in a way, he was. Because Ethan's real life, his true test of endurance, didn't begin until the final school bell rang. The secret life. While other teenagers went home to do homework, play video games, or argue with their parents about curfew, Ethan's responsibilities were of a different magnitude entirely. His afternoon was a carefully timed routine. He would arrive at his small, worn-down house on the edge of town, where the paint was peeling and the fence leaned tiredly. Inside, he would find his 10-year-old sister, Lily, doing her homework at the kitchen table. He'd help her with her fractions, make sure she had a snack, and listen to her stories about school with an attention that belied the exhaustion already settling deep in his bones. Their mother, Sarah, would be resting in her room. 2 years ago, a debilitating illness had stolen her ability to work, draining not only her physical strength but also the family's savings. Their father had left shortly after, unable to handle the pressure. At 15, the weight of the world had quietly, unceremoniously, landed on Ethan's shoulders. He didn't complain. He didn't despair. He simply did what had to be done. By 6 o'clock, he would have dinner ready, usually something simple like pasta or sandwiches. They would eat together, the three of them, a small island of a family. Ethan would feign interest in his own homework, his textbooks open on the table, but his mind was elsewhere. He was calculating. He was listening to the sound of his mother's breathing, checking the level of her medication, and watching the clock. At 10 p.m., after his mother and sister were asleep, Ethan would slip out of the house. His destination was the Northgate Logistics Warehouse, a sprawling, soulless building on the industrial side of town. It was a place of concrete floors, fluorescent lights that hummed a constant, monotonous tune, and the smell of cardboard and machinery. This was Ethan's other school, his other life. From 10:30 at night until 6 in the morning, 5 nights a week, he wasn't Ethan Miller, the quiet high school student. He was employee number 734. His job was grueling. He was a picker, tasked with moving through the endless aisles of towering shelves, scanning barcodes, and loading boxes onto a pallet jack. The boxes were often heavy, filled with everything from electronics to car parts. The work was repetitive, mind-numbing, and physically punishing. His body ached constantly. His hands were covered in calluses and small cuts from the cardboard. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the mental exhaustion. The fight to stay awake, to remain alert, to not make a mistake that could cost him the job he so desperately needed. He saw the sunrise not as a thing of beauty, but as a signal that his shift was almost over, and his other, equally demanding day was about to begin. He would take the bus home, shower in silence, put on his school clothes, and try to force down a piece of toast before walking back into the world of Northwood High, the ghost in the hallways. The teacher's perspective. Mr. David Harrison was a history teacher who had been at Northwood High for over 20 years. He was the kind of teacher students remembered long after they graduated. He wasn't flashy or loud, but he had a way of seeing students, really seeing them. He noticed the girl who suddenly stopped drawing in her notebook, the boy whose easy smile had become forced. He believed that the most important lessons weren't in the textbooks, but in the untold stories of the young people in his classroom. And for the past few months, his attention had been drawn to the quiet boy in the back row, Ethan Miller. It started with small things. At first, he noticed Ethan's frequent yawns, which he initially dismissed as typical teenage boredom. But then he saw the dark circles under the boy's eyes, a bruised, permanent shadow that seemed to deepen with each passing week. He noticed how Ethan would sometimes rest his head on his hand, his eyes fluttering, fighting a losing battle against sleep in the warm, stuffy classroom. A few times, his head had dropped completely, only to jerk back up with a quiet, startled gasp. Mr. Harrison started paying closer attention. He saw that Ethan's hands, though clean, were rough, with the scraped knuckles of someone who did manual labor. He observed Ethan at lunch, eating his simple, homemade sandwich with a slow, deliberate pace, as if even chewing was an effort. He was rail-thin, his school uniform hanging loosely on his frame. But most of all, it was his eyes. Mr. Harrison saw a weariness in them that he'd seen in soldiers returning from war, a profound, soul-deep exhaustion that no 17-year-old should possess. His concern grew. Ethan's grades, once stable, began to slip. An essay handed in a week late, a test score that was uncharacteristically low. When Mr. Harrison gently asked if everything was okay at home, Ethan would just nod, his eyes fixed on his desk, and murmur, "I'm fine, sir. Just tired." The wall he had built around himself was impenetrable. But Mr. Harrison was a patient man. He knew that sometimes, the most important thing a teacher can do is to simply keep watch. Rising action and near misses. The warning signs began to escalate. One afternoon, during a study period in the library, Mr. Harrison found Ethan asleep in a secluded corral, his head pillowed on his history textbook. He wasn't just dozing, he was deeply unconscious. It took Mr. Harrison 3 attempts, each with a gentle shake of the shoulder, to rouse him. Ethan woke up in a state of pure panic, his eyes wide and disoriented, looking around as if he didn't know where he was. For a split second, the mask of quiet indifference was gone, replaced by raw fear and confusion. He stammered an apology, gathered his books, and fled the library, leaving Mr. Harrison standing there with a knot of anxiety tightening in his stomach. Another incident occurred a week later. The school was holding a fundraiser, and parent volunteers were serving food in the cafeteria. Mr. Harrison overheard one of the mothers complaining loudly about her son. "He sleeps until noon on weekends," she said with an exasperated laugh. "I swear, this generation is the laziest one yet. No work ethic at all." Mr. Harrison happened to glance over at Ethan, who was sitting alone a few tables away. The boy's jaw was clenched, his hands balled into fists on the table. He wasn't looking at anyone, but the quiet intensity radiating from him was palpable. It was a flash of anger, of deep, personal offense, that was gone as quickly as it appeared. He stood up, dumped his tray, and walked out, his back rigid. Mr. Harrison felt a pang of certainty. This wasn't laziness. This was something else entirely. The final clue came on a rainy Friday evening. Mr. Harrison had stayed late to grade papers. As he was driving home around 9:30 p.m., his headlights cut through the downpour, illuminating a lone figure at a bus stop on the far side of town, an area with no student housing. It was Ethan. He was drenched, hunched under the flimsy shelter, staring out into the darkness. Not in the direction of his home, but in the opposite direction, towards the industrial park. Why would a student be here, at this time of night, in this weather, heading away from home? Mr. Harrison pulled his car over 100 feet down the road, his heart pounding. He wanted to go to him, to offer him a ride, to demand an explanation. But he knew it would only make Ethan retreat further. So he just watched. He watched as the 10:05 p.m. bus, the last one of the night that ran to the industrial park, hissed to a stop. He watched as Ethan climbed aboard, his silhouette briefly visible against the light before disappearing inside. And as the bus pulled away, leaving the bus stop empty and slick with rain, Mr. Harrison knew. He didn't know the specifics, but he knew Ethan was in trouble. He knew the boy was hiding a secret life, and he knew he could no longer stand by and do nothing. Driving home, the teacher made a decision. He had to find out the truth. For Ethan's sake. A concerned teacher. A student vanishing into the night. Mr. Harrison now knows that something is terribly wrong, but he has no idea how deep Ethan's secret goes. What he discovers next will shatter him. Click here for part 2 to witness the moment of truth and the emotional confrontation that changes everything. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The investigation. The weekend was agonizing for David Harrison. The image of Ethan at that bus stop, soaked and alone, was burned into his mind. He couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the boy's exhausted eyes, his calloused hands, his fierce, quiet pride. This was more than just a teenager with a part-time job. This was a child carrying an adult's burden. On Monday, he arrived at school with a plan. It was a delicate situation. A wrong move could embarrass Ethan or get him into trouble he didn't deserve. He started by discreetly checking Ethan's school records. The emergency contact information was for his mother, Sarah Miller. There was no father listed. The address confirmed he lived in the modest housing development on the west side of town. There were no notes from social services, no flags for concern. On paper, Ethan was just another student. But Mr. Harrison knew that paper rarely told the whole story. During his free period, he decided to call the number on file. He rehearsed what he would say, a generic call to check in, to discuss Ethan's recent dip in grades. A young girl answered the phone, her voice bright and cheerful. "Hello?" He asked for Mrs. Miller, and the girl replied, "Mommy's sleeping right now. She gets really tired. Can I take a message?" It was Lily, Ethan's sister. Mr. Harrison's heart sank. He identified himself and Lily's tone immediately became protective. "Is Ethan in trouble?" she asked, her voice small. "No, not at all," he reassured her. "I just wanted to talk about his great work in class." He lied, not wanting to cause the family any more stress. "Oh," she said, relieved. "He works really hard. He's the best brother ever." That innocent, heartfelt praise was like a dagger to Mr. Harrison. He thanked her and hung up, his resolve hardening. "He works really hard." The girl had no idea. That evening, driven by a need he couldn't explain, Mr. Harrison found himself driving towards the industrial park. He felt like a spy, a trespasser into a life that was not his to see, but the feeling of responsibility was stronger than his discomfort. He pulled into the parking lot of a closed business across the street from the Northgate Logistics Warehouse, the largest building in the area. He cut his engine and waited. The minutes ticked by. At 10:25 p.m., the bus he'd seen Ethan board on Friday night pulled up to the stop. A handful of weary-looking adults got off, along with one teenager. Ethan. He was wearing a dark hoodie and carrying a worn backpack. He walked with his head down, moving with a grim determination towards the massive warehouse. He swiped an ID card at a side door and disappeared inside. Mr. Harrison just sat in his car, the silence pressing in on him. He had his proof. The quiet boy from his fourth-period history class was working a full-time, overnight shift in a warehouse. The thought was so staggering, so profoundly unjust, that for a moment, he couldn't breathe. The revelation and the conversation. Mr. Harrison didn't go in that night. He drove home, his mind a storm of anger and sorrow. The next day at school, he watched Ethan with new eyes. He no longer saw a quiet student, he saw a warrior. He saw a boy who was sacrificing his youth, his health, his education, for his family. He knew he couldn't let it continue. That evening, he went back to the warehouse. This time, he didn't wait in the car. He walked up to the side door and spoke to a security guard, explaining he was a teacher needing to speak with a young employee about an urgent family matter. After some persuasion, the guard radioed a supervisor. A few minutes later, a burly man named Frank came to the door. "You looking for Miller?" he asked, eyeing Mr. Harrison with suspicion. "Kid's a hard worker. Never late, never complains. What's the problem?" Mr. Harrison simply said, "I need to speak with him." Frank led him through the cavernous space, the noise of conveyor belts and forklifts echoing around them. And then he saw him. Ethan was at the end of an aisle, methodically lifting heavy boxes from a shelf onto a pallet. His movements were robotic, efficient, exhausted. He was sweating despite the cool temperature of the warehouse, his face pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. He looked small and impossibly young surrounded by the towering metal shelves. Frank called his name. "Miller. You've got a visitor." Ethan turned, and his eyes met Mr. Harrison's. The transformation on the boy's face was devastating. The blank mask of exhaustion was instantly replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. He looked like a cornered animal. His face went white, then flushed with shame. He dropped the box he was holding, and it landed with a loud thud that seemed to echo the teacher's breaking heart. Mr. Harrison dismissed the supervisor with a nod and walked slowly towards Ethan. The boy couldn't look at him. He just stared at the dropped box on the floor, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Ethan," Mr. Harrison said, his voice gentle. "Let's go somewhere we can talk." He led him to a small, cluttered break room. Ethan sat down heavily, refusing to meet his teacher's gaze. For a long moment, there was only the hum of the vending machine. Finally, Mr. Harrison spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Your sister told me you work hard, Ethan. She was right. But she has no idea." At the mention of his sister, Ethan's composure finally broke. A single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. "Please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please don't tell anyone. I'll lose this job. We need this job. My mom." He couldn't finish. And so the story came tumbling out. He spoke of his father leaving, his mother's sickness, the endless pile of medical bills and rent notices. He talked about starting the job at 16, lying about his age, using a friend's older brother's ID. He spoke of the bone-deep weariness, of the terror of falling asleep in class, of the constant fear of being discovered. He confessed that he was failing, not just in school, but he felt he was failing his family, too. He was running as fast as he could, and it was never enough. He spoke without self-pity, stating the facts of his life as if he were reading an inventory list. It was a confession born of pure exhaustion. The weeping moment. Mr. Harrison listened to it all. He listened to a 17-year-old boy describe a life of responsibility that would crush most grown men. He heard the quiet dignity, the fierce love for his mother and sister that fueled this impossible sacrifice. He saw a child who had been forced to give up his own childhood, trading it for sleepless nights and aching muscles, all for the sake of his family. When Ethan finally fell silent, head in his hands, Mr. Harrison felt something well up inside him. It wasn't pity. It was a profound, overwhelming sense of awe. Awe at this boy's strength, his courage, his unwavering sense of duty. And with that awe came a wave of crushing sorrow and righteous anger. Anger at a world that would allow a child to be put in this position. Sorrow for the youth that was being stolen from him night after night. And then, to his own surprise, David Harrison began to weep. He sat in that dingy break room, across from his exhausted student, and cried. He cried for the injustice of it all. He cried for the boy who had to choose between his education and his family's survival. He cried for the silent battles being fought by so many kids just like Ethan, hidden in plain sight. They weren't tears of pity. They were tears of respect. Tears of a shared humanity. Ethan looked up, shocked, seeing not a teacher who was there to punish him, but a man who was grieving for him. And in that moment, for the first time in 2 years, Ethan Miller no longer felt like he was alone. The aftermath and resolution. That night marked the end of Ethan's secret. Mr. Harrison drove him home, assuring him that they would figure things out together. The next day, he met with the school principal and a guidance counselor, and for the first time, Ethan's full story was told to people who could help. The school community, once they learned of the situation, responded with an outpouring of support. The principal quietly organized a fundraiser among the faculty. The guidance counselor connected Sarah, Ethan's mother, with social services and community aid programs she'd been unaware of, helping with medical bills and groceries. Mr. Harrison became Ethan's personal advocate. He arranged for tutoring to help him catch up on his schoolwork. He spoke to Ethan's boss at the warehouse, not to get him fired, but to explain the situation. The supervisor, Frank, who had always respected Ethan's work ethic, agreed to give him a weekend-only day shift, with fewer hours but at a slightly higher pay rate. Slowly, a change began to occur in Ethan. With the community's support lightening his financial burden, and with his nights now free for sleep and study, the shadows under his eyes began to fade. He started to participate in class, offering insightful comments that revealed the sharp mind that had been clouded by exhaustion. He even joined the chess club. He was still quiet, still reserved, but his presence was no longer that of a ghost. He was becoming visible. His greatest change was seen in his relationship with Mr. Harrison. The teacher was no longer just an authority figure, but a mentor and a friend. He had seen Ethan at his most vulnerable and had responded not with judgment, but with compassion. He had shown him that it was okay to ask for help, that strength wasn't just about enduring a burden alone, but also having the courage to share it. The story of Ethan and Mr. Harrison became a quiet legend at Northwood High. It served as a powerful, unspoken reminder that you never truly know the battles the people around you are fighting. It's a reminder that behind a quiet face can be a story of incredible strength, and that the greatest lesson a teacher can ever impart is the simple, profound act of seeing a student, not just for who they are in the classroom, but for all that they are in the world. One teacher's compassion changed the course of a young man's life. Ethan's story is a reminder to look closer, to listen harder, and to never underestimate the hidden struggles of those around us. If this story touched you, please like the video and share it to spread this powerful message. Subscribe for more stories that matter. And let us know in the comments, has anyone ever shown you kindness when you needed it most?